Hey y'all, it's Kim. So I've been reading a book called hold on, I gotta grab it. The Legacy of Ashes by Tim Weiner. I can't see where I'm at here. Anyway, the history of the CIA. But I wanted him basically for ChatGPT just to give me like 2,500 word synopsis of what the CIA was up to between 1946 to 1965. And then I asked for please add cited sources. This is for a video, not a school assignment, because I didn't want them thinking I was trying to cheat. Some excitement because I'm an old lady, so I don't need that. And then it just says here's a crisp story driven synopsis, about 2,500 pages of what the CIA was doing from the immediate post World War II period through 1965, organized by era and mission set with load bearing citations to declassify documents or reputable histories at the end of the most relevant paragraphs. 1946 to 1949. So from improvised coordination to a standing spy service. When World War II ended, the United States dismantled the OSS, or the Office of Strategic Services, then almost immediately realized it still needed centralized peacetime intelligence. In January 1946, President Truman created a stopgap Central Intelligence Group, or the CIG, to coordinate intelligence across departments. The following year, Congress put the function on firmer footing by establishing the Central Intelligence Agency in the National Security Act of 1947. The new CIA was changed with correlating or charged with correlating and evaluating intelligence and crucially, with such other functions and duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the NSC might direct. That vague phrase quickly opened the door to covert political warfare against Soviet influence in Europe and beyond. At first, the CIA's foreign operations arm was small and contested inside Washington. By 1948, as fears of communist gains rose, the National Security Council authorized covert political warfare, propaganda, support to friendly politicians and unions, and other gray activities. In these early years, the agency refined a toolkit, secret funding and messaging, front organization, safe house tradecraft, and liaison relationship with allied services. The ethos was improvisational. Do what it takes to blunt Soviet momentum while keeping American fingerprints off the outcomes. 1950 to 1952, the Korean War and the maturing of covert action. The Korean War drove rapid growth. Inside the CIA, the Office of Policy Coordination, or the OPC, and the Office of Special Operations ran psychological operations, staying behind networks and paramilitary experiments that weren't ready for prime time. The agency learned some hard lessons, particularly about the difficulty of inserting agents behind the Iron Curtain, and shifted towards operations where the terrain, physical and political, was more favorable. Contested post colonial states, unstable coalition governments, and places where money and messaging could swing outcomes. At the same time, long range technical collection was being imagined. Leaders in CIA and the Air Force sought ways to see deep into denied Soviet airspace without triggering war. Those concepts planted the seeds of two transformational programs that would define the next decade: a high altitude reconnaissance aircraft, or a U 2, and ultimately a satellite system, Corona. I've got something on that that I'll probably try to go through sometime next week. In 1953, Iran tested methods of consequential success. In 1953, the CIA, working with Britain's MI6, executed T.P. Ajax, excuse me, the covert action that helped topple Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh after a showdown over oil nationalization. Declassified CIA Internal History by Scott Koch uh, details the mechanics, propaganda to paint Mossadegh as lawless, cultivating clerical and political allies, orchestrating demonstrations and counter demonstrations, and leaning on the palace to reassert the Shah's authority. The coup was not a single strike, but a rolling campaign. An initial failure was followed by renewed effort and a reversal of fortunes in August. The operation, later regarded by many historians as strategically short-sighted, nonetheless became a template inside the U.S. government for what money, messaging, and local proxies might achieve against a nationalist leader perceived rightly or wrongly as vulnerable to the Soviets. Let me pull that one up for later. Okay, so 1954, sorry, just wait for this thing to load. All right, so 1954's Guatemala, psychological warfare, proxies, and plausible deniability. Stupid. Sorry. Okay. A year later, CIA carried out Operation PB Success in Guatemala, aimed at President Jacobo Arbenz, whose land reform and confrontation with the United Fruit Company collided with Eisenhower era threat perceptions. Declassified document collections show the blend of tactics: a small exile force trained and guided by CIA, radio black propaganda to erode the regime's will, targeted intimidation of officers, and diplomatic pressure that magnified the psychological effect of limited kinetic action. FRUS cables and CIA reading room narratives make clear that the military correlation of forces favored Arbenz, but the information battle was decisive, inducing a crisis of confidence inside the Guatemalan high command. Arbenz resigned in June of 1954. The short-term success seeded long-term stability and became a cautionary example of blowback. Did I already do that one? I'm trying to, yeah, I already got that, I think. PB success. And then I'll probably open this one. Okay, so in 1954 to 1956, the U2 and Seeing the Unseeable. While coups grabbed headlines, the most strategically valuable CIA achievement was technical. The U2, designed with Lockheed's Skunk Works, the U2 could cruise above 70,000 feet, beyond the reach for a time of Soviet interceptors. CIA's rationale wasn't voyeurism, it was crisis prevention. Leaders needed to know whether the USSR truly had a bomber or missile advantage. Flights beginning in 1956 returned photography of bomber bases, missile test sites, and air defense deployment that punctured myths about a bomber gap. The secrecy around these flights and the need to explain strange high altitude sightings helped produce a pattern the CIA later admitted. Some UFO reports in the 1950s to 60s were actually U-2, a later A-12 or SR-71 aircraft seen at altitudes no one expected, with officials sometimes allowing UFO speculation to persist to protect the programs. 1955 to 1962, From the Edge of Space, Corona. Even the U-2 had limits, whether risk of shoot down and the political shockwaves from violating sovereign airspace. The strategic solution was orbital. The Corona reconnaissance satellite declassified CIA histories in a 1995 National Reconnaissance Office release described a program that sounds like science fiction even now. Film return satellites shot panoramic images of Soviet and other denied territories, then ejected re-entry capsules snatched midair by C-130s. After early failures, an August 1961 mission succeeded, inaugurating an era when the U.S. could reliably count missile silos and track military construction from space. The missile gap evaporated under this new clarity, easing worst case assumptions and giving presidents better options short of war. Let me make sure. Yeah, I already have that pulled up. I have that pulled up and that one. Okay, I just want to make sure. And then 1959 to 1962, Cuba paramilitary overreach and analytic redemption. By the end of the Eisenhower years, Cuba dominated CIA's Western Hemisphere work. The agency built and trained the Cuban exile force and coordinated a plan to land them in 1961 to ignite an anti-Castro uprising at the Bay of Pigs. The outcome is well known. Poor assumptions about popular support and invasion beach that funneled forces into kill zones and presidential decisions to limit overt U.S. involvement doomed the mission. The failure catalyzed organizational change. Robert Kennedy's relentless oversight, the expansion of the special group, and internal studies of covert actions limits. The following year, however, CIA analytic and technical side scored a crucial success. U-2 photography in October 1962 detected Soviet SS-4 and SS-5 missile sites in Cuba. That discovery triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis and gave the U.S. the evidentiary backbone for a measured stepwise response, a naval quarantine, and back-channel diplomacy, backed by ongoing imagery that confirmed Soviet dismantlement. The same reconnaissance capabilities that had been built for the Soviet heartland proved decisive 90 miles from Florida. 1960 to 1965, the Congo, covert action in a decolonizing crucible. The Congo crisis became some of the era's most complex and morally fraught arenas for CIA. Newly declassified FRUS volumes and CIA studies and intelligence pieces reveal a multi-year political program, subsidies, advice, and influence operations designed first to eliminate Patrice Lumumba from power in the political sense and later to bolster Jose Desiree Mobutu, as a stabilizing pro-Western figure. Documents reflect discussions spurred by President Eisenhower's comments at an NSC meeting about assassination plots. Poison was discussed and devices were sent to the field. The church committee later concluded that such plotting occurred due to the particular murder plan, or though the particular murder plans were not carried out. Lumumba was ultimately killed in January of 1961 by Congolese adversaries with Belgian complicity. Through 1965, CIA continued to bankroll allies and manage political networks. Mobutu consolidated power that year, inaugurating a long-lasting and notoriously kleptocratic rule the U.S. nevertheless saw as strategically useful amid Cold War competition. I think I have these in that. I think I have some of those pulled up. We'll look at some of those documents. In the 1950s to mid-1960s, domestic overreach revealed later. Two controversial programs that began in the 1950s only fully came to light in the 1970s. The first was HT Lingual, a mail opening program that intercepted, photographed, and sometimes opened mail between the U.S. and certain foreign countries. Senate histories and archival materials described it as starting in the Cold War's early years and running until or under different names into the 1970s when it was dismantled. The program mixed counterintelligence targets with broader names traces, illustrating how fear of subversion could erode civil liberties, guardrails when oversight was weak. Okay, I think I already have that pulled up. And then the second was MK Ultra, the CIA's umbrella for behavioral research, some of it unethical and non-consensual. And y'all should read Tom O'Neill's book called Chaos. It talks a lot about that in there and what they did. They think, what's his name? The dude with the family. Oh crap, his name has slipped my mind. I can picture his face with the swastika on his forehead. Shoot, I'll think about it in a minute. Okay. The second was MK Ultra, the CIA's umbrella for behavioral research. Charles Manson. Sorry, I couldn't think of his name. Surviving CIA files and hearings show that beginning in 1953, the agency funded over 100 sub-projects across universities, hospitals, and prisons. Subjects were sometimes dosed with LSD without informed consent. MK Ultra also overlapped with Army work. MK Naomi on bioagent storage, delivery for covert use. Much of the paper trail was destroyed in 1973, but what remains and witness testimony underpins the Senate's MK Ultra hearing volume and the Church Committee's Book 1, which condemned the program's violations of rights and norms. Let's see. I don't know if I have this one pulled up. Project MK Ultra. I don't think I do. We'll just do that. No, I don't have it. Okay. And then Loveman. Shoot. I hate when it does that. Okay. Church Committee. And then what's this one? MK Ultra. Yeah, we'll look at this stuff later. It'll probably just be another day. But yeah. Okay. So European and Soviet bloc caution tunnels and trademark. Behind the Iron Curtain, high-risk agent insertions often failed. Soviet and satellite state counterintelligence bolstered by moles devastated networks. The West Berlin Tunnel in 1955 to 56, CIA MI6 effort to tap Soviet landlines epitomized a cat and mouse. Technically brilliant, ultimately compromised by George Blake, a British officer spying for the KGB. Even compromised operations had analytic value. They taught CIA what normal Soviet communications looked like and what sudden silences might signal. And even where direct access proved perilous, the agency collected prodigiously on military readiness, economic indicators, and political fault lines via technical means, refugees, and liaison reporting. For this era's technical context, see the CIA and NRO histories of Corona, which became a cornerstone for strategic warning. I don't know. Did I already do that one? Yeah, I already have those. Okay, Southeast Asia and the periphery. So learning curves. In Southeast Asia, the agency's 1950s playbook, money messaging the small paramilitary bets, produced mixed results. The period just before 1965 saw CIA move from episodic meddling to deeper, sustained efforts alongside the Pentagon and the State Department. In Laos, for example, early 1960s programs cultivated irregular forces and air logistics that would later define the secret war. In Indonesia, covert meddling around regional rebellions in 1958 fizzled and taught hard lessons about plausible deniability and the risk of visible American fingerprints. These cases reinforce a theme that runs through the period. Covert action could be a scalpel or a boomerang, depending on local legitimacy, allied competence, and strategic patience. The Church Committee's broad overview and later FRUS volumes document how quickly limited actions could entangle the U.S. in local power struggles. Inside the buildings, reorganizations, cultures, and guardrails. Between 1946 and 1965, CIA's internal structure and culture evolved almost as fast as its mission set. The Office of National Estimates, or ONE, cultivated a tradition of interagency estimative products that sometimes clashed with policymakers' preferences, especially when estimates punctured comforting narratives, e.g., missile gaps. The clandestine side, eventually, the director of plans swung between swagger, fresh off Tehran, in Guatemala, and sober reassessments after fiascos like the Bay of Pigs. Directors shifted the balance among covert action, human intelligence, and technical collection, but the irresistible driver was technology. By the mid 1960s, imagery from U2 and Corona had become the gold standard for order of battle intelligence and strategic warning, and it centered CIA in the president's daily decision loop. I think I may already have this. Yeah, I already have that. And then that too. Okay. Yet the same era showed how secrecy, speed, and presidential urgency could erode internal checks. The assassination discussions in the Congo files and the abuses documented later by the Church Committee sparked post 1975 reforms, executive orders banning political assassination, standing intelligence oversight committees in Congress. Those reforms were born of the very practices the agency had normalized in the 1950s and early 1960s when America was improvising a peacetime secret service in a bipolar world. Let's see, I've got all that. I've got that too. Okay. So summing up the era, 1946 to 65, across these 2 decades, CIA moved from an ad hoc coordinator to a mature institution with world-class technical collection and a controversial covert action toolkit. Its signature achievements, clarity about Soviet capabilities through U2 and Corona, insight that helped presidents avert worst-case spirals, and nimble political action in places like Italy, Iran, Guatemala, and the Congo came with steep trade-offs. Some wins incubated instability, anti-Americanism, or authoritarianism. Failures, notably the Bay of Pigs, humbled the agency, prompting structural changes in the more disciplined interagency processes. And behind the scenes, programs like HT Lingual and MK Ultra showed how a mission defined by any means urgency could drift into ethically indefensible territory absent robust oversight. Anyway, that's just something that it was giving me the sources for and all that stuff. But I'll go through some of those others. So quick outline. Okay, I don't need that. Anyway, so that was pretty much the end of that. But I just want to give kind of like a short synopsis of what not what I've come up with, but that's what ChatGPT says. But this book and then The Devil's Playbook, or no, The Devil's Chessboard, those are some good ones. And Tom O'Neill's Chaos. That's another book y'all should look into if you're curious about what the CIA has been up to all this time. I know 65, but I was just trying to see if it mentioned anything about Kennedy, but it really didn't. It's Sir Robert. But anyway, yeah. But yeah, I wanted to kind of move away a little bit from the Jeffrey Epstein stuff for right this minute because it's like that was pretty heavy. The videos I did earlier, because the girls describing what happened to them is kind of gross. Anyway, I will talk to y'all later. Have a good day. Bye.